Hello, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and give us about a minute before we start, just so we can have a nice group here and drop any questions you have in the chat if you have any. Excellent. Alrighty, we have a pretty good group here. So, good morning or afternoon, everyone. My name is Mariela Salinas. I'm a marketing specialist here at Educate 360. Welcome to today's webinar, Getting ITIL to Work for You, presented by PeopleCert's Head of Americas, David Cannon. We are in Zoom for today's session, and we will be sharing a copy of this recording with you in an email after the webinar. We do encourage participation throughout the webinar, so please use the chat or that Q&A option for our short Q&A after the presentation. Educate 360 is so excited to present this webinar today. I will now hand it over to you, David.
Thank you very much, Mariela, and welcome to everybody who's on the call with us. For those of you watching a recording, welcome to you as well. These webinars, by the way, are all being recorded, and I will give you a link a little bit later on where you can access the previous webinars in the same series. Today, we're going to be looking at part 3 in the Winning with ITIL webinar series. And as I've said, you can go and look at the previous 2. I will be referring to information that we've covered in those 2 webinars a little bit later on in this webinar. So if you want to get a hold of that material, you can follow the link that we're going to give to you in a moment. In fact, in one of the slides towards the end of the presentation. Right now, though, let's have a look at what's in store for us today. So today, we're going to be looking specifically at how we get ITIL to work for us. And one of the key areas that helps us to understand how to get ITIL to work and how to implement ITIL practices is this thing called the 4 dimensions of service management. It is part of ITIL. Those of you who have done a foundation course will recognize it. Those of you who have not, this is the treat that's in store for you. We'll also be looking at the ITIL practices as a whole. What are they? What do they look like? What's inside them? How do we use them? And specifically looking at how we use those practices all the way through the management of digital technology within our organization. So in many cases, you'll hear about ITIL being referred to as the set of guidelines for IT support. It goes way beyond support. It includes support, but it goes all the way through from the operation of digital technology to the strategy, which determines how technology is used and which technology we're going to use. So I'm going to look a little bit at how that works, and then look at some implementation approaches. These are just very high level. One of the most common questions is, I want to use ITIL within my organization, but where do I start? How do I get going? How do I scope it? And part of the answer to that question is not only the approach that you use, but also the value streams that you're supporting. Value streams are one of the core components of ITIL 4. And I'm going to show you in this presentation a little bit more about why those value streams are so important. Now, again, I did mention that I'm referring to previous episodes or webinars in the series. And we did discuss value streams in part 2 of this series. So if you want to know more detail about that, go back and look at that webinar online. So what are the 4 dimensions of service management? And very importantly, why? Why do we use these 4 dimensions? So before I show you what they are, let's have a look at why they were put together. And the reason that we created this thing called the 4 dimensions within ITIL 4 is because we wanted to be able to communicate there are certain things that no matter who you are, if you are providing services, you will need to do certain core things. It doesn't matter what kind of services you're delivering. It doesn't matter what kind of technology you're using, but there are certain things that just have to be in place if you want to provide those services effectively. So the 4 dimensions defines what those components are. It shows us exactly what they are, and it shows us why they're important. It also gives us a really good starting point. I know a lot of organizations in the past have kind of thought, well, I'm gonna define how to manage services. We're unique. The rest of the industry doesn't really apply to us. So I'm going to start from the beginning. I'm going to define everything I need to do because an approach like ITIL or COBIT or IT for IT or any one of those doesn't really have everything the way we need it to be for our organization. So we're going to start from scratch. Now, of course, you are welcome to do that, and many organizations have, but it's a lot quicker when you have a good starting point. You don't have to do everything that's in that 4 dimensions model, but it gives you a good starting point. It tells us how to evaluate those things that we need, those things that are most important, and things that are not as important for our organization. But they do give you a very good checklist. So when we're getting ITIL to work for us, it's very important that we know which pieces we're definitely going to need in our organizations and which components are not that important to us, or at least not that relevant just yet. But the checklist that you'll find in the 4 dimensions will make sure that you're not missing anything important. So just a really helpful guide, a really helpful reference point as we're implementing service management practices. Now, what about those organizations who are unique? And that is every single organization. There is something unique about every organization. It may be some of the processes you use. It may be the people that work with you. It may be the way in which departments are organized. It may be the kind of work you do, the kind of services you deliver, the kind of products you create. But every organization is unique. The 4 dimensions take that baseline, those things that are used across the industry, and they help provide tools to evaluate which things do you need to customize, which things do you need to change to suit your organizations, and if you do need to change them, how do you need to change them? So they're really there as not only a reference point, but it also contains tools on how to adapt those common practices to the unique requirements of your organization. The other thing that the 4 dimensions does is it helps inform decisions. And what I mean by that is, very often we face a decision. Should we do option A or option B? If we're going to use, for example, if we're on a service desk and we're implementing or we're increasing our self-help strategy through the use of AI, and we're going to integrate some of the other parts of our organization into our IT service desk and turn it into an enterprise service desk. How do we go about doing that? What are the advantages of doing that? What are the tricks? What are the traps? What should we avoid doing when we're doing that? Well, the 4 dimensions helps us to do that as well. The 4 dimensions and the practices help us to do that. But another very important thing, and I'm going to cover this in a lot more detail as we go through the presentation, and that is that the 4 dimensions help to show dependencies between practices. This is very important because in today's organizations, we often face a situation where we're being asked to implement or do one thing. So I want to do incident management. or we've got incident management in place. I want to do problem management. And we're going to focus 100% of our effort on problem management and getting it to work. Well, it's not that easy, because when you do problem management, you'll soon realize, if you don't already know, that there are things that you depend on. Yes, you've got incident management in place. We know there is a relationship between those two, but there's also relationships with other practices, things like capacity and availability management, things like monitoring and event management. There are various dependencies which sometimes are second level. So they're not direct, at least at first glance, but they're there. And if you ignore them, you find out, much later than you should be, that you should have put this into your planning when you were developing the plans for problem management. So the 4 dimensions really help us to identify those dependencies, whether they're very direct dependencies or whether they're more indirect, maybe a little bit hidden at first. And the 4 dimensions help to unhide them and make sure that you're aware of them, so that as you plan for implementing and making ITIL work for you, you have everything in mind that you need to deal with. Another thing the 4 dimensions do, this is a really important one, they help you to avoid costly shortcuts. Now, what do I mean by a costly shortcut? For example, there's a bit of a trend at the moment. Actually, it's not just at the moment. This has been around for ever since vendors have been selling ITSM tools. But there is a little bit of a trend which says you really don't need to worry about the processes and that kind of thing, because it's all embedded in the tool. So all you have to do is implement the tool. So your entire budget for your ITSM program is covered by the tool implementation and customization costs. Don't worry about the other stuff, because it's all automated in the tool. Oh, and by the way, we can be sure of this because it's all AI. So if we do get it a little bit wrong when we first put it out there, it's going to learn and it's going to correct itself, and everything is going to work out okay. There is no such shortcut. Organizations that try to take that shortcut find out within a year that their ITSM program is not succeeding the way they wanted to. It's not meeting the objectives that they've set. And to fix it now involves retroactively going back and fixing the things that they should have done in the first place. And it's a hugely costly exercise. It's a hugely expensive exercise. There you go. It also helps you to avoid pitfalls. If you've got the 4 dimensions and they show you how the dependencies, what the dependencies are, how they link together, well, it helps you to avoid pitfalls of not knowing that we should have planned for this, or we should have done something this way. So between the practices and the 4 dimensions, getting ITIL to work for you, these are 2 very important tools. And that's why I'm going to cover them in more detail now. By the way, if you have questions, do put them in the Q&A. I am also monitoring the chat as much as I can while I'm presenting. So please do make use of those. Also, comments, feedback, please do make use of the chat or the Q&A. Right, now let's take a look at these 4 dimensions. I've just said how important they are. Well, what are they? So in the actually, I think in the last webinar, webinar 2 of this series, we talked about the importance of value. The fact that the reason why ITIL exists, the reason why we as service management professionals or IT professionals, the reason we exist is to contribute to the value of our organization. It's to help the organization reach the objectives that are valuable to them. So this sits right at the middle of the 4 dimensions. And the 4 dimensions are the 4 areas that you need to plan for when you're getting ITIL to work for you. So right at the center of that is value, or you can put it another way. Why are we doing what we're doing? What is the reason for this particular initiative? What is the reason for us implementing this practice, or for adopting ITIL, or for using this new tool? What's the value in it? Why are we doing this? One of the most important questions that you can ask in whenever you're implementing a project, not only for ITIL, any project, but it is especially true for ITIL. Why are we using it? I'll tell you why it's important for ITIL. And that is because with everything documented in ITIL, it's very tempting to take the practice guides and simply implement them because ITIL says so. That is not the reason why anybody should be implementing ITIL. We implement ITIL not because it says so or because it's an industry standard. It isn't, by the way, but because the ITIL practices will help us to achieve something that is valuable to us. So really important before we get started understanding how to get ITIL to work for us, understand why. What is it we're trying to achieve? Then we need to have a handle on what are the products and services we deliver. Now, ITIL is primarily a service management framework, but services do depend on products. And therefore, there is a very close linkage between services and products. At the very least, we have to know what the products are that we're using and how we're using them to manage services or to deliver services. We can also use services, by the way, to deliver products. So there is a very strong relationship between products and services. I'm not going to go into that in detail. That's a whole other webinar. But in this webinar, it is important when we're talking about getting ITIL to work for you, that you are able to articulate what services you're delivering, what products you're using, and who are the teams that are involved in building, managing, delivering, etc. So that's an important piece of knowledge. Very difficult to do incident management if we don't know what the services are. In fact, any of the practices, but I'll use incident management as an example. Well, why do we need to know what the products and services are? Well, the way you handle that very first call, the knowledge articles that you use, the questions that you ask when you are diagnosing what's gone wrong, all of those depend on understanding which service is being used or what products are involved in that person using that service. So even at a very basic level for incident management, before you get going, know what the products and services are. I may have told the story, I think it may be on one of the previous webinars, but recently had a situation where an organization lost its email and its website. But nobody really figured it out until much later. And when they realized, this was after a few days, when they realized that the website was down, because they didn't check it themselves, they waited for a customer to complain and they thought, oh, well, maybe there's something wrong with the customer's internet service provider or something. Well, when they realized the service was down, it was traced to a reset done by the ISP of the domain name service settings. Which shouldn't have been done, but it was done, and therefore the traffic was not directed to their domain. So they didn't get emails, the website was not available. Now, if we understood that the service email and the service website or product website depended on this domain name service being configured in a certain way, and we do know this, but if we know what the relationship is between the DNS at the ISP and these two particular services, it becomes a lot easier to figure out where things are going wrong. So it's really helpful. Instead of just thinking about, yeah, DNS, we know what a DNS is, that's great. Yeah, we know how to configure one, yes. But in real time, are you able to trace the fact that a particular outage to email and a particular coinciding outage to the website were traced to a DNS setting? Takes a little bit more sophistication. In this organization's case, because those connections were not made, took them 3 days to solve the problem. So products and services, very important. Now the 4 dimensions themselves. So this is at the core of the 4 dimensions. They inform everything else that happens in the 4 dimensions. And I've put them in some colors so that we can differentiate them. The first dimension is organizations and people. So if you want to get this particular part of ITIL to work for you, incident and problem, or change management, or capacity management, or architecture management, whatever component of ITIL you need to have working for you, who are the people that are involved? Where are they? How are they organized? How are they measured? Who do they report to? Are they part of an IT department, or are they sitting out in a business unit somewhere? If they're in different places, how do they communicate with each other? Those kind of questions are really important when we're starting to implement ITIL and service management practices. If we don't know those questions, then what we're going to do is we're going to start implementing a tool or a process and then find out afterwards that certain people are not using it, cannot use it, won't use it, etc. So very important as we're getting ITIL to work for you, know who is involved and what that organization structure looks like today. You may need to change that organization structure. If so, what's that going to look like? And how are you going to get from where you are today to where you need to be? Very important component of an IT service management or any kind of service management implementation. The second one, and this is the one that gets most of the attention today, is the information and technology. I say it's the one, but in fact, only half of that is the one that gets the attention, and that is the technology piece. I'm not going to do a poll, but I will ask the question, and you can think about it in your organization. In organizations like yours who have embarked on or are busy with an ITSM implementation of some kind, how many of those organizations are referring to it by the name of the tool that they're using? I.e., I don't want to use names, but let's use one of the common ones. How many of you have heard people are not referring to an IT service management implementation, but referring to a ServiceNow implementation? Well, yes, the tool is a really important piece and it brings a lot of functionality and it helps us to do things that we were not able to do before. It makes it easier for us to do things that we're already doing, but there's a lot more to the tool. Just in the first name of that dimension, information. It's not important I mean, it is important to know what tool you're going to use, but it is just as important to know which information that tool is going to have access to, where that information is, who needs it, and when do they need it. Tools do not answer those questions for you. They can help provide some sort of functionality that gives you a clue as to what the answer should be, but it's up to you as the owner of that information, your organization, to define exactly how that information can and should be used. The next dimension is value streams and processes. As I mentioned, we spoke about this in the last webinar. And yes, I see there are a couple of questions in there. I'm going to get to those in a moment. But yes, one comment that I just saw, we almost always refer to an ITSM project by the brand name. And by the way, sometimes we even call it an ITIL project. And sometimes it is an ITIL project, but more often than not, it's broader than ITIL. It's more specific than ITIL. We're using ITIL, but we're doing something for our organization. Great. Yes, there is a recording. I will be posting a link to that at the end of this webinar. Okay, value streams and processes are very important. Now, the reason that they're important is because they help us. In fact, I'm going to cover this a little bit later, but they help us to understand the parts of what we're doing that are broader than just us. So within IT, if we're an IT department, we're putting in place these IT service management processes, and they're going to help us to solve incidents, to make changes, so on and so on and so on. But value streams help us to understand what other parts of the organization need from us and how they use the things that we do or the outputs that we produce. So if we don't know what they're expecting from us and what they do with the services we deliver to them, it's a lot more difficult for us to get it right. So value streams help us to really put, if you like, they really help us to understand what the big picture is that we're supporting. And the final dimension, the fourth dimension of the four dimensions, is partners and suppliers. This is a really interesting one in ITIL 4. We always spoke about suppliers in ITIL version 3. That was suppliers or vendors was the term that we used. But in ITIL 4, there's a subtle shift. There are partners. Why? Well, the reason for this is because a lot of the things that used to be done only within the IT department have been outsourced to other organizations. And those organizations are working with us almost as if they were part of our organization. They are supporting our objectives. They are being measured in the same way that we're being measured. So these are more than just people who were going to and saying, hey, I need X, Y, and Z, and they deliver it. No, these are people who are working with us to help implement the solutions that we need to help deliver services that we provide to our organization. So this term partners, very important. And it also, there's an interesting thing that happened, and this was primarily because of cloud. And that is that there started to become a separation in the kind of services that IT departments consumed. So, for example, before cloud, everything was in the data center. So the hardware infrastructure was extremely important to us for a range of different devices. Sometimes, and yes, we do still have servers and hardware in our data centers, but a lot of those have been moved into the cloud. So those things have become commodities. We outsource them because somebody can do them cheaper and better than we can. That lets us focus on more of the value contributing activities within our organization. So how do we manage those providers that provide commodity services like server cloud services, infrastructure services in the cloud, versus those who are working side by side with us to help develop, build, and deliver the services and the products that we use within our own organization. So partners and suppliers, some little nuances in there. In any ITSM implementation, if you want to get it to work for you, all four of these dimensions have to be in place. You cannot implement ITSM if you just are focusing on implementing a tool, if you're just focusing on training people, if you're just focusing on asking other business units what they need from you, or if you just go to a supplier and say, hey, can you do it all for me? It's impossible. All four of these have to be in place to some degree or another in order for your ITSM project to work. Right. Having said that, these four dimensions with the products and services don't happen in a vacuum. They happen within the context of the environment that your organization is in. And in ITIL, you can use any mnemonic to define the context. In ITIL, we use PESTLE, and that stands for political, economical, social, technological, legal, and environmental factors. These factors are all components or parts of the environment within which we're in, the ecosystem that we're in. So it's not just about, hey, how are we going to implement service management? It's about how we're going to implement service management within the context of our organization's strategy, which is what economic benefits are we going to get? How are we going to influence or respond to changes in society that are causing customers to deal with us differently, et cetera, et cetera. Now, there's an interesting thing that happens here. At least I think it's interesting. If we turn this model on its side, and by the way, you will not see this in ITIL. It's implied in ITIL, but I'm going to give you a diagram which kind of pulls it together. And if we turn this a little bit on its side so we can see 3D, what you'll see is those contexts have two kind of layers. The first layer is external. And whenever we think PESTLE, political environment, environmental, social, etc. Whenever we think about those factors, we tend to think about the external environment. Political. Well, we got an election coming up in November. It's a pretty big one and it's pretty contentious. How's that going to impact our organization? A lot of you may say, well, yeah, our service desk doesn't really depend on that political situation at all, really. Yeah, but what about inside your organization? What are the politics like inside your organization? And here I'm not talking about party politics. Here I'm talking about, how do decisions get made? Who has the most influence? How do you need to get people to support your project? Right? That's politics. It happens inside your organization. So when we look at the context of service management, don't just think about outside your organization. Think about the things that are happening inside your organization that are going to impact how your service management project works. Now, I know that kind of sounds self-explanatory, kind of sounds like, well, yeah, of course, but it's very surprising that when we talk about the context of service management, that most projects only take into account one or two of these environmental factors. They look at things like what is the return on investment, i.e. financial, and they'll look at things like, yes, potentially political. But what about the other things? What about the compliance aspects, the security aspects? What about the environmental aspects? Is there anything there that is going to influence the success of our project? And I think if you consider those, if you look at them, you will find a couple of really important success factors that you would have missed if you had not really looked at those environmental factors inside and outside your organization. Okay. So what does this mean? What it means is you want to be successful, you want ITIL to work for you, you have to focus on all four dimensions. Now, don't just take my word for it. I'm talking about it as someone who's contributed to ITIL over the years and so on. But again and again and again, I have seen projects fail because somebody focused on just one of the dimensions, or maybe just two of the dimensions and ignored the others. Or maybe they looked at all four dimensions, but they ignored the context. It's really important to focus on all of those. Make sure that you've got them. Now, you may not want to do all of them at the same time, but it's important that you've at least taken a look at them. And when you make a decision to not do something, you've got a good understanding of what the impact of that decision is going to be and how you're going to deal with the outcome of that. Also, I'm going to pick on tools. Again, I've already mentioned this, but tools alone do not determine success because they don't define things like organizational structure. They don't affect, or they may affect, but they don't determine, they don't define the culture and internal politics of your organization. They do not dictate which services are most valuable. They don't define an operating model for your organization. Operating model is how you work, the way you do things, the way you make decisions. They do not define business models. Business models are how your organization is structured so that it is able to meet its objectives successfully. So any solution that focuses on a single dimension may have short-term success, but it is not going to be viable in the long term. So I really wanted to stress that point. And again, I'm stressing that because of just how many projects I've seen that have failed because of this. All right. So let's look at the ITIL. Now, I'm not going to look at all of the ITIL practices, but I do want to put them in context. If we want to get ITIL to work for us, then we're probably going to need to refer. In fact, we're definitely going to need to refer to the ITIL practice documents. Now, what is a practice? In ITIL, it's the full name, the formal name is a management practice. We just refer to them as practices. But they are a set of organizational resources. Resources is more than just people. It is people, it's information, it's technology, it's products, it's services, but it's a set of organizational resources that are designed for performing work or accomplishing an objective. Let me put it another way. It's a structured way of working. Another word that has often been used for a practice in the past is the word discipline. It is a management discipline. It is a way of doing things. It is people that do those things. It is a set of, I don't want to use the word standards, but yeah, it's a set of standard behavior or professional activities that need to be done in order to achieve something. So there are three categories of ITIL practice, three types of practice. First one is general management. These are things that it doesn't matter what you're doing in an organization, they need to be in place. For example, human resources or managing the workforce. That's general management. You do that whether you're in IT, whether you're in manufacturing, whether you're in medicine, doesn't really matter. General management. Of course, we apply it to service management within ITIL, but it is a general management practice. The second group, and this is the biggest group in ITIL, is the service management practices. These are the practices that show us which disciplines, which resources we need to use, and how to use them to meet our commitments of delivering services, in our case, services that are based on digital technology. And then the third set of practices is technical management. These are also very important. These technical management practices, they're grouped into three. I'll show you them in a moment. So they're not very many, but in each of those three, there's a huge number. So, if we can take, in fact, let me show you. There you are. There's a list of the 34 practices. Don't worry, not a test on this. And I just wanted to give you an idea of how rich the framework is. Don't worry about reading each individual one. I'm going to just lift out one or two. So technical management, for example, you have infrastructure and platform management. One practice, but actually covers a huge number of specializations. In there is network, there is server management, there's operating systems, there's a bunch of stuff that goes under there. These practices do not tell you how to manage a network. What they do is they tell us the disciplines that are commonly used by technology specialists that are really important when you're doing service management. So in other words, which of these technology management practices are important and, in fact, more than important, critical for us to be able to deliver and support services. So three areas of practices, 34 in all. Every single one of those practices is important. Now, I asked the question at the top of that, which of the 34 practices are you using? And generally, when I ask this, the answer I get is a subset of the middle column. Yeah, we use problem, we use asset management, incident management, change control. Well, maybe that's what your group is using, but I'll bet if you were to look broadly in your organization, you will see that all 34 of these practices are in place somewhere. One of the key things about the 4 dimensions is to help you connect all the dots, right? So instead of having everybody working off on their own and going in their own direction, the 4 dimensions help you to identify if you've got that capability in place somewhere in the organization, how do you connect it? How do you use it? How do you make sure that practice is robust enough to support the service objectives that we have? So 4 dimensions really helps us to do that. Now, I want to say this very clearly. It's not feasible to implement all 34 practices at the same time. Right. So I don't think I've ever seen an ITIL project, and I hope I never do, which includes all 34 practices. And we're going to do them all in a year. No, it's not feasible. Number one, it's not possible. Given the scale of your organization and the number of processes and organization and information and partners that are going to need to be involved, it's a lot of work. But what you'll find is as you really take a more formal approach to managing services in your organization, when you find a practice that's missing, you'll find there's a gap in your organization. So one of the ways to get ITIL to work for you, don't try and implement it all at the same time, but over time, start looking for things that are missing. You've got the master list. There it is, 34 practices. You'll see as you're trying to achieve improvements, put in place new initiatives, hold on, there's a practice that's not working too well. I know we do it to some extent, but it would be great if we could ramp it up, improve it, and build it in as part of this project. And that takes place over time. Studies have shown how much time could be 5 years, could be 10 years, could be 15 years. This is a long-term thing. Oh, come on. Really? ITIL takes 15 years to implement? No, you can start implementing some parts of ITIL right now. They'll work for you within a month. But the thing is, which parts of your organization are all under 5 years old? There are things in your organization that have been going for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. They've matured. They're part of the key component of the way of what makes your organization successful. Service management is one of those. Don't expect service management to come in 5 years, fix everything, and then you move on to the next thing. No, it's one of those core capabilities that's going to be around for a long time. And yeah, over time, a long time, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, you'll start seeing it growing, maturing. You'll start adding in practices, building on practices. So what's in a practice? If any of you have seen a practice guide, this is what they look like. And these are the contents. So every practice guide has the same sections. They give you some general information like, why would you ever want to use this practice? What terminology do you need to understand to use this practice? Now, I say understand, you may already have some of these terms in place in the organization. Are you using them consistently across your organization? So understanding how ITIL uses the terms is a good step. You don't have to use it in the same way, by the way, but it's important that because it's a framework, when it uses terms, it's going to use them the same way throughout the framework. So good for you to know what they are. We then look at value streams and processes that may be impacted by that particular practice. The organizations and people, and look at that, 4 dimensions: value streams, organizations and people, information and technology, partners and suppliers. All of the components of the 4 dimensions are in every practice guide. This is how it enables you to make those connections. It also, and here's a really cool thing about these practices, is they have in the practice guide a couple of pages, in fact, a few pages that help you to understand how to measure just how effective your practice is working. It helps you to identify where the gaps are, and you can then figure out how to plug those gaps. If you want to get ITIL to work for you, the tools are in the practice guides themselves. Okay. So how do we use ITIL practices to succeed? And I just want to, from operation to strategy, there's just something I want to touch on here very briefly. In the industry over the last, I would say, probably 8 years, the word ITSM, IT service management, has kind of taken on a bit of a different meaning. It's become known, ITSM has become synonymous with these 4 things, maybe 5 things, depending on whether you want to include service catalogs in there. So ITSM refers to only those things. Why? Well, because a few of the tool vendors have made that decision for you. When you do ITSM, these are the 4 things you need to do. Oh, but don't we need to understand the cost of providing these services? Oh, no, that's a different module. It's called IT financial management. Oh, okay. But what about asset management? Because everything that we need to do to support services is based on assets, and we need to manage those assets. Oh, that's a different module. It's called IT asset management. And it's even a different book. Cool. Yeah, that's great. But I'm starting a network operations center and a security operations center. And I really, is that not important for figuring out where the services are being delivered effectively? Yes, it is. But that's a different module. Look, there it is. IT operations management. What's happened in the industry right now is that a number of specializations have emerged. I just blame the tool vendors. It's not just the tool vendors, of course, but a number of specializations have emerged. And this perception has grown that these are all separate and different things. And the only thing they have in common is this configuration management database. Not true. These have to be integrated. There are dots between them that have to be connected. To make ITSM work for you, to make ITIL work for you, it's really important. And you can keep these tool modules, you can even keep these practices within your organization, but they do need to be integrated. They do need to work together. They're all essential. Specialization is good, but fragmentation is not. In other words, fragmentation or siloing, where nobody speaks to each other. That's not a good thing. Specialization is great, by all means. But also remember, not everything can be done using tickets and workflows. There are a lot of things in there, like financial management, which is more than just a ticketing system. So please, if you want ITIL to work for you, do not be limited by the functionality in the tool that depends on ticketing. There's a lot more. Ticketing is very important for incident, change, etc., but it's not everything. So the other thing to bear in mind, current CMDB approaches, despite claims, are not working well. They've improved, but they're not where they should be. Now, how do we reunite those four ITSMs? Well, first thing is, as I've said already, value is at the center of the puzzle. Everything that we do should revolve around, why are we doing this? What are the outcomes that we're hoping to achieve? What are the business objectives that we're supporting? And then, instead of focusing on the function, hey, we need an ITSM, incident problem change request fulfillment function. No, what we need is a contribution. We need the ability to support the services we deliver. That ability is enabled by incident, problem, change, service requests, etc. We need the ability to contribute towards the management of assets and configuration information. We need the ability to manage financial information and communicate that information in meaningful ways. We need the ability to have stable operations. These are not groups. These are abilities, and they're shared across multiple groups. They're also shared across multiple practices. So whenever thinking about getting ITIL to work for you, don't think too small. Don't think in terms of individual practices and I'm going to have an incident management, therefore I need an incident management team. You might need an incident management team, but that has to be part of something bigger, incident and problem management, and probably change management. So there are capabilities that go across the teams. That's what you should be focusing on rather than the individual teams themselves. So be part of a bigger picture. And this that I've just shown you is all part of the operational layer of ITIL. These things are all operational. They have to be done on a day-to-day basis. They inform day-to-day decisions, and they ensure day-to-day delivery and support of services. Some of them feed into the next layer, which is to design, build, deploy, and orchestrate. In other words, coordinate everything that's going on to be able to deliver those services. And those feed into the even bigger picture of digital and IT strategy. By the way, just as you see, there are four sort of sets of practices in the middle of the operations layer. There are more practices in the green circle. There are even more practices in that purple circle. So the practices within ITIL are designed to support all three layers of management within your organization. Okay, implementation approaches, just a few words on this. There are really two major approaches, and I just want to point this out to you. I got this from Miller Hyman. They were writing about strategic selling, and I thought, what has selling got to do with IT? Sure enough, most sales and most ITSM projects happen for one of two reasons. One is because I'm in trouble. Something has failed. We got hit by a CrowdStrike outage. Sorry, low blow. Something failed. We need to prevent that from ever happening again. We're in trouble. What do? Well, let's implement some ITIL practices, and that will get us out of trouble. Great. There's a strategy there. Find the point of pain. What's the quickest solution? Identify the ITIL dependencies using the 4 dimensions. Focus on short-term benefits. Plan for short-term activities. You may mention longer-term effects of that plan, but that's not what's going to sell the project. That's not what's going to make it work. People want to get out of pain right now. Now, after you've been successful, you've solved the problem, don't just leave it. Now you move to the second reason why ITIL projects are often thought of, and that is to grow something. Well, we've got AI coming. How are we going to use AI within our business? How are we going to support it? How are we going to use it as part of our ITSM practices? How's that going to impact our tools, our people, our partners, and our value streams? When we're answering that kind of question, our getting ITIL to work for you may be part of a growth strategy or a growth project. Key there is to move from where you are today and achieve that growth. As I mentioned before, when you're in trouble, don't just get out of trouble and leave it. Get out of trouble and then put in place a growth plan. That'll stop you from dipping back into trouble again. When you're in growth mode, this is the time to focus on the big picture. Talk about the ITIL framework. Talk about any framework you like. Build or find that framework that you can talk about. Dedicate someone to the sales effort. This is important, right? ITIL doesn't work because it's such a great idea and everybody believes in it. It works because somebody's selling it to the rest of the organization. So it doesn't have to be ITIL. It could be a part of ITIL. It could be the solution to that particular pain point. But whatever it is, you need to sell it. Remember the context, politics, and so on. So there you go. Sell deep, wide, and long. Don't just sell to the financial buyer, the person who's going to make the decision to release budget. Sell to everybody who could potentially be impacted by the growth and sell them on the benefits. Then, as you go through growth, be agile, right? Keep adjusting. Improve, innovate, adjust if you made a wrong call. If your growth plan, if the plan you had wasn't quite the right way, adjust it. Be agile. Now, on using value streams, just a couple of things here as we come to the end of this webinar. The first thing is, here's a guideline for you. If you want to get ITIL to work for you, the best thing you can do is get it to work for somebody else in the organization. That's because we're service managers. People don't really know that we're around unless they're receiving something that is valuable to them, something that they think is important. So if you want to get ITIL to work for you, if you wanted to grow your career, if you wanted to make your department successful, the best thing you can do is find out what somebody else needs from you or what they want from you and figure out how to use ITIL to give it to them. Value streams help us to do just that. They help us to define which practices we should focus on the most and to what extent we should focus on that practice. Remember I said you don't focus on all 34 at once. Probably choose one or two and then build in some links, some future dependencies that you're going to build on. Maybe implement one as the primary focus and maybe two as a supporting focus. So which one should be primary, or should it be more than one? Which one should be secondary or supporting? And should it be more than two or three? This is what the value stream analysis that you do in your project is going to help you. And the practice guides show you how to do those value stream analysis. Value streams also show you the why. Remember, I said you want to be successful, understand why you're doing it. What is the value of it? Value streams tell you why. They tell you what people are expecting from your organization, from your group, from your team, from your department. But they also help you to measure what's important. Nothing worse than picking up a set of KPIs that somebody else developed because all change management should have these KPIs. Really? What's important for your organization about change management? Which are the things that people really want to know about changes in your organization? Is it how many changes you made? Is it how quickly you made them? Probably not. Tell you the one thing that they want to know more than anything else, is this change going to work? And if it doesn't work, what are you going to do about it? That's what they want to know. That's what they want to see measures about. They want assurance, right? And every organization is going to have different requirements. But I can tell you it's, what we measure, those KPIs may be useful for measuring the performance of your team internally. They don't mean anything to people outside of your organization. So what does mean something to them? Understanding the value stream will answer that question. Here are some examples of value streams. Sometimes they're internal to an IT department, right? They involve multiple teams. They involve more than one process. They may involve more than one tool. So things like request to fulfillment, for example, involves incident management. It involves service requests, it involves change management. So there's more than one process being used, more than one practice, but it's all inside IT. That's one kind of value stream. If you like, you can call that an internal value stream. And then there are the type of value streams that are bigger than IT, things that may even be managed by somebody else in the organization, not the IT group. Things like, for example, new hire onboarding, maybe that's managed by HR. Somebody orders the product, it then gets manufactured, and it then gets delivered to the customer. Oh, that's manufacturing and distribution. But IT is very much a part of that value stream. We don't own it, but we definitely contribute to it. Student enrollment to payment. There's one for a university that we've been working in recently. Again, IT doesn't own that value stream. There's a lot of processes involved, and we contribute to it. If all we're doing is providing services without understanding how those services are used in those value streams, we won't know how to report on our contribution. We won't know on which practices are most important and why. Right, that brings us to the end of today's webinar, Making ITIL Work for You. In the next webinar on August 22nd, we're going to be looking at a more personal level. How can you grow your career using ITIL? As you can see, I've got a long career, and ITIL has been very much a part of that. And I'd like to share with you some of the secrets to career growth that I've experienced and some of the secrets to career growth that I've seen within many of my colleagues, many of the students that have been taught on these courses. So that's what I'm going to look at on August 22nd. It'll be the final in the series. I mentioned before, if you want to look at previous webinar recordings, here is the link that you can use. In fact, I wonder. No, sorry. I will cut and paste it into the chat. Oh, in fact, thank you, Mariella has already done that. Click on that link and you can get access to previous recordings of those webinars. Just to end off with a reminder that there are some upcoming ITIL 4 Foundations classes for those of you who would like to take them, start your career in service management or build to the next level of your career in service management. And these are the dates of the next foundation courses. They are guaranteed to run. So please do join if you have not already joined foundation. You have joined foundation. If you've already been foundation certified, on the next webinar, I'm going to point out exactly what kind of certification paths and career paths may be helpful to you. With that, we're going to end this webinar. I have just checked. No further questions. So thank you all for your time and look forward to seeing you on the next one, 22nd August. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, David. This is so much fantastic info. And just to reiterate, in case you need any more info on this topic, please do not be afraid to visit that resources tab or visit us at newhorizons.com. And if you missed out on any part of this session or you're watching a recording currently, we will be following up with this recording in an email after the webinar. And if you want to get access to any of those links, they'll definitely be in the email follow-up as well. So thank you so much, David.
Thank you, Mariella, and thank you everybody for attending.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you very soon. Bye.